The night was calm, and the sound of clattering plates filled the air as Toby finished cleaning the restaurant. He moved quietly, careful not to break anything. The bright lights above made the tables shine, and the smell of freshly cooked food still lingered in the room. Madame Layla, the owner of the restaurant, stood near the counter, counting money from the day's sales. She was a woman who worked hard for everything she had, and she expected her workers to do the same. Toby had been working there for almost a year. He never came late, never argued, and always greeted everyone with a humble smile. His clothes were old, his shoes worn out, and yet he never complained. Even when other workers made fun of him or ignored him, he stayed kind and respectful. The customers liked him because he always bowed slightly and said, "Thank you, ma," or "Yes, sir." He was polite to everyone. But there was one thing that made Madame Layla curious. Every night, after all the customers had gone home and the lights were dimmed, she noticed Toby would quietly pack some leftover food into a small plastic bag. It wasn't much, just pieces of bread, rice, or meat that no one had finished. He would wrap it neatly and hide it inside his old bag before leaving. She found it strange. At first, she thought maybe he was taking the food for himself. That wouldn't be a big problem. After all, many workers ate leftovers when they were hungry. But what puzzled her was that he never ate it at work. He always waited until everyone had left. Sometimes he even looked around nervously as if he didn't want anyone to see him. One evening, after the restaurant had closed and everyone was preparing to leave, Madame Layla pretended to be busy checking the books. She kept her eyes on Toby from a distance. As usual, he cleaned the last table, picked up the leftover food and wrapped it carefully. Then, when he thought no one was watching, he slipped it into his bag and walked quietly toward the back door. Layla frowned. What is he doing with that food every night? She thought to herself. Is he selling it? Giving it to someone? Or wasting it? She had seen many workers before, some honest, some not. Some would steal food or money and lie about it. But something about Toby felt different. He didn't have the look of a thief. His eyes were kind and sad, and his body looked tired as if life had been heavy on him. Still, her curiosity grew stronger every day. Later that night, when everyone had gone home, Madame Layla sat in her car, thinking about Toby. She remembered how he never asked for anything, never complained about his small pay, and always worked hard even when sick. Yet there was a mystery around him. She felt she needed to know the truth. The next day she decided to test him. She placed a small tray of leftover food near the kitchen and watched from a hidden corner. As always, Toby came in after cleaning. He looked at the food, sighed softly, and whispered something to himself. Then he carefully wrapped it and put it inside his bag. There was no greed in his eyes, only quiet purpose. He didn't eat a single piece. Layla's heart began to stir. Why does he do this every night? She wondered. Her restaurant was one of the best in town, filled with laughter, rich customers, and delicious food. Yet, this one worker, silent and humble, carried leftovers away as if they were treasures. That evening, when it was time to close, Toby finished his duties as usual. He wiped the tables, washed the dishes, swept the floor, and checked the bins to make sure nothing was left behind. He greeted everyone with a small smile before leaving. Once again he had his little bag hanging from his shoulder, and he walked quietly out of the back door. Madame Layla stood at the window watching him go. The streetlights outside cast long shadows on the road. She saw him turn left, walking slowly but with purpose. Her curiosity was stronger than ever now. She picked up her car keys, locked the door, and followed him. From her car she could see his small figure walking down the road. His steps were steady but tired. The bag swung lightly on his shoulder. She kept a safe distance so he wouldn't notice. For some reason, her heart was beating fast. She wasn't sure what she would find, but something told her this wasn't about theft. It was about something deeper. The road became quieter as he walked farther. Most shops were closed and the streets were empty. Only the sound of Toby's footsteps echoed softly. Occasionally he would stop to greet a night guard or help someone move something heavy. Even in the dark, his kindness shone through. Layla drove slowly, careful not to make noise. She watched him disappear around a corner, then followed. Her eyes widened slightly when she realized he wasn't heading toward the city center. Instead, he was walking toward the poorer part of town, a place she rarely visited. The houses there were old and broken, with weak lights and small dirt roads. She parked her car far enough to stay hidden and stepped out quietly. The air smelled of rain and dust. In the distance, she saw Toby walking toward a small wooden hut. There was no sound except for the soft rustling of leaves in the wind. She wanted to call out to him, but something stopped her. Instead, she stayed in the shadows watching. Toby knocked lightly on the door, then opened it. A faint light came from inside. Layla couldn't see clearly, but she heard soft voices, a woman's weak cough and a child's small laugh. Toby's voice was gentle. "Mama, I brought some food," he said softly. "And for Ada too." Layla's breath caught in her throat. So that's where he took the food. Not to sell it, not to waste it, but to feed his family. She could feel her heart tighten with emotion. As she stood in the dark, watching Toby serve food to his sick mother and little sister, a single tear rolled down her cheek. She realized that sometimes kindness hides in silence. That night, she decided she would never judge anyone again until she truly knew their story. And as Toby smiled inside the little hut, happy to see his family eat, he had no idea that someone outside was watching. Someone whose heart had just been changed forever. The night was cool, and the city lights slowly faded behind him as Toby walked farther away from the restaurant. The streets that once glowed with shining billboards and passing cars turned darker and quieter with every step. His shoes were old and thin, and the soles made soft sounds against the ground. The small bag in his hand swung gently as he walked, filled with the leftover food he had wrapped so carefully. He didn't look around much. His eyes stayed focused on the path ahead. Once in a while he wiped the sweat from his forehead and adjusted the strap of his bag. The city was large and his walk home was long, sometimes more than an hour. But he didn't mind. He had done it so many times before that his feet seemed to know the way by heart. Behind him, a short distance away, Madame Layla's car moved slowly along the side of the road. The headlights were dimmed so Toby wouldn't notice. Her hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, and her eyes followed his every move. She didn't understand why she was doing this, why she was following her worker through the dark streets. But curiosity had taken hold of her heart. At first she thought he might be going to meet someone or sell the food. But as the journey continued, it became clear that this wasn't a business deal or a secret meeting. There was something different about his walk, quiet, patient, and filled with purpose. The tall buildings began to disappear behind them. The roads narrowed, and the bright streetlights were replaced by dim yellow bulbs hanging on crooked poles. Madame Layla had never driven this far into the outskirts. The air smelled of smoke and dust, and small children played near the roadside, their laughter echoing in the night. Toby greeted an old man sitting by a fire with a polite nod as he passed. The man smiled back and said something in a friendly tone, but Toby didn't stop. He kept walking, his steps steady, his bag held close. From inside her car, Layla watched with growing curiosity. Her restaurant stood in one of the richest parts of the city, full of noise, cars, and fine perfume. But here the world looked different. People sat outside their homes, some cooking with small fires, others selling fruits and bread by the road even at that late hour. She could see thin figures walking barefoot, carrying buckets of water. The sounds of laughter and struggle mixed together in the cool night air. Toby turned onto a smaller path. The ground was no longer paved. It was rough and uneven. Madame Layla slowed her car, afraid to drive farther without being noticed. She parked near an old tree and stepped out quietly, locking the door without a sound. Her shoes crunched lightly on the dirt road as she followed him on foot. From a distance she could see his silhouette, tall, thin, moving steadily under the dim moonlight. He wasn't afraid of the darkness or the long walk. It was as if he had walked this path 1,000 times before. Layla pulled her coat closer. The wind was cold and the smell of wet earth filled the air. Somewhere nearby a dog barked. She stayed hidden, her heart beating faster. "Where is he going?" she whispered to herself. Toby turned again, this time onto a path lined with small broken houses made of wood and tin roofs. The sound of voices came from nearby, a woman singing softly, a baby crying, someone calling out for water. Life here was simple, hard, and real. For the first time, Madame Layla felt a strange ache in her chest. She had grown up in comfort, surrounded by clean streets and soft lights. She had built her restaurant with years of hard work, but she had never truly seen how others lived. Watching Toby walk into this world of poverty opened her eyes in a way nothing else ever had. Toby slowed his pace as he approached a small corner. A flickering light came from a tiny shack at the end of the road. It was hardly bigger than a storage room with wooden walls and a weak roof patched with plastic sheets. He stopped in front of it and took a deep breath before opening the door. Layla stood still, half hidden behind a tree, watching silently. Inside she could see a faint glow from a candle. A soft voice spoke from within, old and gentle, almost weak. "Toby, is that you, my son?" "Yes, Mama," he said softly, stepping inside. "I brought some food." Madame Layla's breath caught in her throat. She could barely see, but the scene was clear enough. A woman sat on a mat on the floor, wrapped in an old blanket. Her face was tired, her hands thin. Beside her sat a little girl, probably 7 or 8 years old, wearing a faded dress. She clapped her hands and smiled when she saw the food. Toby knelt beside them and opened his bag. "Look, Mama," he said kindly. "There's rice, some meat and bread. You and Ada can eat first." The old woman smiled weakly. "You haven't eaten all day, my son. You must eat too." Toby shook his head gently. "I will eat later, Mama. You and Ada need it more." From outside, Layla watched with tears forming in her eyes. She covered her mouth to stop a soft sob from escaping. This was not what she had expected to see. She had followed him thinking she might catch him doing something wrong. Instead, she had found something pure, something that broke her heart. The little girl, Ada, laughed happily as Toby handed her a piece of bread. She bit into it eagerly, her eyes lighting up with joy. Toby smiled, watching her eat, his own stomach growling quietly from hunger. Madame Layla leaned against the tree, her heart heavy. She could not move. All the anger, suspicion, and judgment she had felt before now melted into shame and sadness. How could she have thought badly of him? The boy had been feeding his sick mother and little sister, not himself. Inside, Toby sat beside his mother, helping her eat slowly. He spoke softly to her, telling her how the day went, how many customers came, and how he hoped one day to earn enough to fix the roof of their little home. His voice was full of hope, even though his life was full of hardship. Madame Layla stood there for a long time, unable to turn away. The wind blew gently, carrying the sound of their laughter. She realized then that she had been living in a world where people measured worth by money and comfort. But this boy, poor, quiet, and humble, had more kindness and strength than anyone she knew. Finally she stepped back, her eyes wet with tears. She looked at the small house one last time, then slowly walked back to her car. She didn't start the engine immediately. She sat there, staring at her hands, lost in thought. That night she couldn't sleep. The image of Toby feeding his family stayed in her mind. For the first time in a long while, her heart felt heavy, not with anger or pride but with compassion. She had seen something real, something beautiful, in the poorest part of the city. And she knew that from that moment on, her view of the world, and of Toby, would never be the same again. The wind was quiet that night, carrying the faint smell of rain and smoke through the narrow street. Madame Layla followed Toby until he stopped in front of a tiny, broken house at the edge of the slum. The walls were made of old wood and rusted tin, patched together with pieces of cloth and plastic. A single flickering candlelight glowed faintly through a small window. Toby paused for a moment at the door, wiped the sweat from his forehead, and then gently pushed it open. The door made a long creaking sound as it moved. Madame Layla stopped a few steps away, her heart pounding. She looked around, there was no one else outside. Only the sound of crickets and the distant barking of a dog. Quietly she stepped closer and peered through the small window. What she saw made her hand fly to her mouth. Inside the tiny room there was hardly any furniture. A few cracked plates lay on the floor and a thin mat was spread near the wall. On that mat lay a little girl no older than 7, her body small and frail. Her cheeks were sunken and her eyes half open, too weak even to sit up. Beside her sat an older woman, her face tired, her hands trembling as she held a small cup of water. "Mama, I brought dinner," Toby said softly as he knelt beside them. His voice was gentle, filled with warmth. He placed his worn-out bag on the floor, opened it, and took out the food he had wrapped from the restaurant. Madame Layla could see his hands shaking slightly, not from fear but from care. The old woman looked up slowly, her eyes bright with relief. "Oh, my son," she whispered weakly, her voice hoarse. "You are home." "Yes, Mama," Toby said, smiling softly. "I finished work late today. I brought rice and meat. It's still warm." The little girl stirred and whispered, "Brother, is that really rice?" Toby nodded. "Yes, Ada. There's even bread too. You must eat well tonight." Madame Layla felt tears sting her eyes. She had followed him thinking he was a thief, thinking he was taking her restaurant's food for his own gain. But now, watching this scene, she realized how wrong she had been. The old woman, coughing softly, tried to sit up. "You shouldn't bring so much, Toby," she said with concern. "Your boss will find out and fire you." Toby shook his head. "It's just leftovers, Mama. Food they would throw away anyway. Nobody will miss it. And you and Ada need it more than anyone." The woman looked at him lovingly, her eyes filled with sadness and pride. "You've grown into a good man, my son," she whispered. "Your father would be proud if he were here." Toby smiled faintly. "I just wish I could give you both more. One day, Mama, things will be better. I promise." From outside, Madame Layla's throat tightened. She pressed her hand to her chest as tears rolled down her cheeks. She couldn't take her eyes off the small family. Every word they spoke pierced her heart. Inside, Toby carefully served the food onto 2 small plates. He gave the first to his mother, the second to Ada. "Eat slowly," he said gently. "It's still warm." His mother took a small bite, chewing slowly as she smiled. "It's delicious," she said softly. Ada giggled, already eating with both hands, joy shining in her tired eyes. "Brother," Ada said between bites, "you didn't eat again?" Toby smiled and shook his head. "I'll eat later, little one. I'm not hungry yet." But Madame Layla could see from his thin frame that he was hungry. His shirt hung loosely on his shoulders, and his face looked tired from long hours of work. He was giving everything he had, not for himself but for his family. She remembered how he always came to work early, how he worked quietly without complaint, how he never wasted food. She had thought he was strange, maybe even sneaky. But now she saw the truth, he was simply trying to keep his mother and sister alive. The old woman coughed again and Toby quickly fetched a small cup of water. He held it to her lips gently. "Drink, Mama," he said. "Tomorrow I'll try to get medicine." She looked at him with tears in her eyes. "You work so hard already, my son. You shouldn't worry so much about me." Toby smiled softly. "You raised me alone, Mama. You went hungry so I could go to school. I can never repay that. Let me take care of you now." Madame Layla wiped her eyes. She had always believed life was simple. Work hard, pay fairly, and people would take care of themselves. But this was different. She realized how many people like Toby lived quietly, fighting battles no one saw. The candle flickered as the wind slipped through the cracks in the wall. Toby wrapped a blanket around Ada's shoulders and whispered, "Sleep now. You'll feel stronger tomorrow." The little girl nodded sleepily, resting her head on her mother's lap. Then Toby sat beside them, tired but peaceful. He looked around the small, broken house, the leaking roof, the thin walls, the empty shelves, and smiled softly as if he had everything he needed. From the window, Madame Layla felt her heart breaking and healing at the same time. She realized that kindness wasn't just about giving money or charity. Sometimes it was about understanding, seeing someone struggle before judging them. As the candle burned low, she slowly stepped back from the window. The night air felt heavy, but her heart felt even heavier. She looked one last time at Toby's small home, the warm glow inside, and the love that filled it despite the poverty. She whispered to herself, "He wasn't stealing. He was surviving." Her eyes filled with fresh tears as she walked back toward her car. The sound of her footsteps echoed softly on the dusty path. She opened the car door but didn't start the engine right away. Instead, she sat there staring at the steering wheel, lost in thought. Images of Toby's mother and little sister played in her mind, their weak smiles, their gratitude for simple food that others threw away. She remembered Toby's gentle voice, his kindness, and his promise to make life better. That night, Madame Layla couldn't sleep. The image of that small house stayed with her. For the first time, she understood what it meant to struggle quietly, to sacrifice for love, and to stay kind even when life was unfair. She knew she couldn't just forget what she had seen. Something inside her had changed forever. And in that silent moment, under the dim glow of the moon, Madame Layla made a decision that would soon change Toby's life, and hers, in ways neither of them could have ever imagined. The morning sun rose gently over the city, painting the streets in soft golden light. Toby walked toward the restaurant with his head lowered and his heart heavy. His hands trembled as he clutched his old bag against his chest. He hadn't slept at all that night. His mind kept replaying the moment he had taken the leftover food, and the fear that maybe, somehow, Madame Layla had found out. He walked slowly, feeling as though every step took him closer to trouble. When he reached the restaurant, everything looked the same. The shiny windows, the smell of fresh bread, the waiters setting the tables, but to him the air felt heavy. He could barely look anyone in the eye. He slipped quietly into the kitchen, ready to start his cleaning, when one of the senior staff members said, "Toby, Madam wants to see you in her office." Toby froze. His hands tightened around the handle of the mop. "Now?" he asked softly. "Yes, now," the man replied, a little impatiently. "She said it's important." Toby nodded nervously. His legs felt weak as he walked down the long hallway to Madame Layla's office. Each step echoed in his ears. He tried to think of what to say, how to explain himself, how to beg for another chance, but his thoughts were tangled with fear. When he reached the office door, he knocked gently. "Come in," came her calm voice. He opened the door slowly and stepped inside. Madame Layla was sitting behind her large desk, dressed neatly as always, her expression unreadable. Sunlight poured through the window beside her, lighting up the room. For a moment, Toby couldn't meet her eyes. "Good morning, madam," he said softly. "Good morning, Toby," she replied, her tone calm but serious. "Please sit down." He hesitated. "Madam, if this is about the food." She raised a hand gently, stopping him. "Yes, Toby," she said quietly. "It is about the food." His heart sank. He immediately stood from the chair, his voice trembling. "Madam, please, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to steal. I know it was wrong, but my mother, she's very sick. My little sister hasn't eaten properly in days. I didn't know what else to do." Toby's voice cracked as he spoke and his eyes filled with tears. "I swear I wasn't selling it or wasting it. I only wanted to help them." Madame Layla watched him silently for a few seconds that felt like forever. Her face softened. Then she sighed deeply and said, "Toby, you don't need to explain. I already know." He blinked, confused. "Madam, you know?" She nodded gently. "I followed you last night." Toby's heart stopped. His legs almost gave way. You followed me?" he whispered. "Yes," she said softly. "I wanted to see where you were taking the food. I thought maybe you were doing something wrong. But when I saw your mother and sister..." Her voice broke for a moment. She looked down at her desk, then back at him with kind eyes. "Toby, you weren't stealing. You were surviving. You were loving your family." Toby couldn't speak. His lips parted, but no words came out. His tears spilled freely now, rolling down his cheeks as he bowed his head. "Madam, I'm sorry. I should have told you. I didn't mean to hide anything. I was just afraid of losing my job." Madame Layla stood up and walked around the desk toward him. Her heels clicked softly on the tiled floor. When she reached him, she placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Toby," she said, her voice warm, "you don't need to be afraid. You should have told me earlier. You didn't act out of greed. You acted out of love, and that kind of heart is rare." Toby looked up, eyes wide with disbelief. "Madam, you're not angry?" She smiled, a kind, genuine smile he had never seen before. "No, Toby. I'm not angry. In fact, I'm proud." From her desk, she picked up a small brown envelope and handed it to him. "Here," she said. Toby took it with shaking hands. He hesitated for a moment before opening it. Inside was a thick bundle of money and a small folded note. He stared at it, confused, then looked up at her. "Madam, I can't take this." "Yes, you can," she said firmly. "It's for your family. For your mother's medicine and for your sister's food. And the note, that's from me." Toby carefully unfolded the note and read the short message written in neat handwriting. "For your family. And from today you are more than an employee. Layla." His hands trembled as he read it. Tears blurred his vision. "Madam," he whispered, voice breaking. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," she replied softly. "Just promise me one thing. Keep working hard, keep that heart of yours, and never lose your kindness." Toby nodded, unable to speak. His heart felt heavy with gratitude. For the first time in his life, someone had truly seen him, not as a poor cleaner, not as a thief, but as a person trying to do the right thing in a hard world. Madame Layla smiled and said, "Take the day off. Go home. Take care of your family. Tomorrow we'll talk about something new, something better for you here." He looked at her in shock. "Something better?" "Yes," she said with a soft laugh. "You've worked hard enough as a cleaner. I think it's time you learn more. Maybe start helping in the office. We'll see." Toby's mouth fell open. "Madam, I don't deserve this." She shook her head. "You deserve even more, Toby. You've proven your honesty. That's more valuable than anything else." He nodded slowly, his tears still flowing. Then, hesitantly, he bowed his head and said, "Thank you, madam. I'll never forget this day. I'll make you proud." As he left her office, the sunlight hit his face through the window. For the first time in a long time he smiled, not a small one but a deep, grateful smile. His heart felt lighter, his steps stronger. Madame Layla watched him go and whispered to herself, "Sometimes people steal not out of hunger for food but hunger for hope." She sat back at her desk and looked out the window, the same path Toby had just walked down. She felt something change inside her, a new sense of purpose. She realized that sometimes, helping one person could bring more meaning than all the wealth in the world. And as Toby hurried through the streets toward home, holding that small envelope close to his chest, he looked up at the sky and smiled. "Mama will eat well tonight," he whispered. The city around him felt different, brighter, kinder, and full of possibility. That morning both Toby and Madame Layla learned something powerful. Compassion has the power to change lives and kindness never goes unseen. The sun rose gently over the city, casting warm light on the busy streets. For Toby, the morning felt different now. Gone were the days of fear, hunger, and uncertainty. Life had begun to bloom again, not just for him but for his family too. The kindness he once thought he would never find had changed everything, and it all began with a single act of compassion. Madame Layla kept her promise. The day after she discovered Toby's secret, she visited his home herself. When she entered the small, broken house, she was shocked by what she saw. The roof leaked, the walls were cracked, and the smell of medicine filled the air. Toby's mother, though weak, stood up to greet her, trying to bow respectfully. "Good morning, Ma," she said softly, her voice trembling. Madame Layla gently held her hand. "Please don't bow to me," she said kindly. "I came to see how you're doing and to help." Toby's mother's eyes widened in surprise. "Help?" she repeated. "Yes," Madame Layla said, looking around the small room. "You've raised a good son, Ma. He is honest, humble, and brave. He deserves a chance, and so do you." That day, Madame Layla arranged for Toby's sister, Miriam, to be taken to a proper hospital in the city. She paid for all the treatment, making sure the little girl received the care she needed. The doctor said that with good food and medicine she would soon recover completely. When Toby saw his sister sleeping peacefully in a clean hospital bed, tears filled his eyes. For so long he had felt helpless, like no matter how hard he worked, life only pushed him down. But now hope had returned and it felt like light after a long night. Madame Layla didn't stop there. She helped Toby's mother open a small food shop in their neighborhood. She gave her cooking supplies, some money to start, and even a new signboard that read, "Mama Toby's Kitchen." At first, Toby's mother couldn't believe it was real. She held Madame Layla's hands tightly and said with tears in her eyes, "You're not just helping us, you're saving us." Madame Layla smiled warmly. "Your son already did that," she said. "He saved you with his love and courage. I'm only helping him finish what he started." Days turned into weeks and Toby continued working at the restaurant, but this time his spirit was different. He no longer walked with his head down or hid from others. He worked with pride, knowing his efforts meant something. His co-workers, who once barely noticed him, now looked up to him with respect. Madame Layla often watched him quietly from her office. She noticed how carefully he handled customers, how he helped new workers learn their duties, and how he smiled even when he was tired. It was clear, Toby had something special. One afternoon she called him into her office again. "Toby," she said with a kind smile, "you've been working here for years now. You've shown honesty, hard work, and loyalty. It's time for something new." Toby blinked, unsure of what she meant. "Madam?" She handed him a letter. "From today you're no longer a cleaner. You're a manager, the youngest one we've ever had." Toby froze. For a moment he couldn't speak. His mouth opened but only tears came out instead of words. "Madam? I don't know what to say." "Say nothing," she replied softly. "You earned this. You didn't just clean floors, Toby, you cleaned hearts with your kindness." He bowed his head, whispering, "Thank you, madam. I'll never forget this." She smiled. "I know you won't. And one day I hope you'll help someone else, just like you helped me see what true goodness means." That night, Toby returned home with a heart full of joy. His mother's small shop was busy, filled with neighbors eating her delicious food. His sister, Miriam, laughed as she helped serve customers. The little girl who once lay sick and hungry now ran around with bright eyes and rosy cheeks. Toby stood at the doorway watching them with a smile that reached his soul. He remembered the nights he had cried quietly, wondering if life would ever be kind. Now, as he looked at his family's happiness, he knew every hardship had led to this moment. When his mother saw him, she rushed to him with open arms. "My son," she said proudly, "you've made us proud." Toby hugged her tightly. "No, Mama," he said softly. "You made me who I am. You taught me to work hard and never stop caring." Later that evening, Madame Layla came by to visit. The neighbors gathered around, amazed to see the wealthy woman in their humble area. She walked into Mama Toby's kitchen with a big smile. "The food smells good," she said cheerfully. Toby's mother laughed. "Please sit, madam. Today I'll serve you myself." Everyone laughed as she brought a plate of rice and stew to the table. Madame Layla ate happily and said, "You could open a second branch soon." They all laughed again, but deep inside, Toby knew it wasn't impossible. His mother's little shop was growing fast, and people from different parts of town came to eat her food. When Madame Layla was about to leave, she looked at Toby and said, "You know, Toby, you once took food from me in secret, But today you're giving food to others with pride. That's the true meaning of change. Toby smiled. You taught me that, madam? She placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. No, Toby. You taught me. You showed me that sometimes the richest people are not those with money, but those with kind hearts. Toby looked at his mother and sister, both smiling, both healthy and full of life. His eyes softened. I used to think life was unfair, he said quietly. But now I see that sometimes pain leads us to people who change everything. Madame Layla nodded, her eyes shining. And you changed me too, Toby. As the evening sky turned orange, the little shop buzzed with laughter, warmth, and love. Toby stood outside, watching the sunset fade behind the rooftops. The world, once dark and cold, now seemed bright and full of promise. He whispered softly to himself, I once stole food to survive. But love, honesty, and kindness gave me a life I could never dream of. And in that moment, Toby knew, true miracles don't always come from money or luck. Sometimes they come from a heart that refuses to give up. The end.